What happens when the exact system keeping a billion-dollar company alive belongs to the one person they just humiliated? 3 days after I walked out of that boardroom, my old company was on fire, and nobody could find the water hose. Before I tell you how it all fell apart, hit that like button like you're closing a deal. Subscribe if you believe quiet people can still win big, and send this to someone who's been underestimated at work one too many times. Let's get into it. My name is Renee Hastings. I'm 34 years old, and for 8 years I gave everything I had to a logistics company called Marlowe Dynamics. Not because I loved the company, because I loved solving problems nobody else could solve. I started as a junior operations analyst, the kind of job where you fix other people's spreadsheets and nobody remembers your name at the holiday party. But I noticed something early on. Our shipping software was ancient. It routed trucks based on outdated maps and guesswork. Deliveries were late constantly. Clients complained every single week. Management just accepted it as the cost of doing business. I didn't accept it. On my own time, using my own laptop, I started building something better. A routing system that could predict traffic delays, calculate fuel costs in real time, and reroute shipments the second something went wrong. I worked on it at night, on weekends, during my lunch breaks. Nobody asked me to do this. I did it because I genuinely believed I could fix something broken. When I first showed it to my manager, he laughed. He said building software wasn't in my job description and I should stick to my spreadsheets, so I kept it to myself. I quietly used it to manage my own workload. Within 2 months, my department's numbers looked like magic. Deliveries on time, costs down, client complaints practically gone. Word spread fast. Soon other departments wanted to use my system too. I said yes, because I still believed in this company back then. I never once asked for money. I never signed anything giving Marlowe Dynamics ownership of what I'd built. I just wanted to see the company succeed, and honestly, I wanted to be seen as someone who mattered. For years, that system quietly ran the backbone of our entire shipping operation. Executives took credit for the smooth numbers in their reports. Nobody thought to ask how it actually worked. Nobody thought to ask who built it. I was fine with that, for a while. I told myself recognition would come eventually. I told myself hard work always gets noticed in the end. I was wrong about that, and I found out exactly how wrong 3 weeks ago, sitting in a boardroom with a promotion I had earned sitting right in front of me, about to be handed to somebody else. If you've ever poured your heart into something at work only to watch someone else take the credit, comment the word "seen" below. I want to know how many of you have lived this exact moment, because what happened to me next might change how you see your own situation. The meeting was supposed to be simple: Senior Operations Director, a position that had been open for 6 months, a position I had unofficially been doing the work of for over a year already. I had the results. I had the client relationships. I had built the very system the promotion was meant to oversee. On paper, there was no competition. Except there was competition, and his name was Derek. Derek was my cousin's husband. 31 years old, charming in that effortless way some people are, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately makes everyone laugh. He'd been hired at Marlowe Dynamics 2 years earlier after struggling to find steady work. I was the one who put in a good word for him. I trained him myself during his first few months. I covered for his mistakes more times than I want to admit, because that's what family does, or at least that's what I believed back then. Derek was likable. Derek was smooth in meetings. But Derek couldn't build a basic report without asking me for help first. Still, when I walked into that boardroom expecting to finally hear my name attached to that promotion, my director, a man named Charles Whitfield, looked me straight in the eye and said the position was going to Derek instead. He told me I was hardworking, dependable, excellent with details. But leadership, he said, requires vision, requires someone who commands a room. He said Derek had that quality naturally, and I simply didn't. I sat there completely still. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Something inside me just went quiet and cold, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm hits. Derek sat across from me in a chair that looked slightly too big for him, clicking a pen I recognized instantly. It was the same pen I had bought him as a congratulations gift when he got hired, back when I still believed helping him meant something good for both of us. He leaned forward and told me not to worry, that I'd still be an important part of the team, handling the details he didn't have time for. He actually smiled when he said it, like he was doing me a favor. And that's when all the pieces clicked into place at once. The night before, my aunt had called me, pressuring me to step back from the promotion. She said Derek needed it more than I did, that he and my cousin were trying to buy a bigger house before their baby arrived, that family takes care of family. I had refused her outright. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a plan I hadn't seen coming. They expected me to cry or beg, or at the very least, accept my new assignment quietly like I always had before. Instead, I stood up, unclipped my employee badge, and set it gently on the table in front of Charles. I looked at Derek one last time and said, "Good luck figuring out the routing system," and I walked out of that room without looking back. Word spread through the office floor faster than I expected. By the time I reached my desk, people were already whispering. Derek followed me, hissing under his breath that I was making a scene, that my aunt would be furious, that I couldn't just quit over losing one promotion. I didn't answer him. I packed my few personal items into a small box, my coffee mug, a framed photo, nothing dramatic. Charles came storming out of his office when he heard I was leaving, threatening to make sure I never worked in this industry again if I walked out that door. I looked at him calmly, opened my laptop right there at my desk, and typed in 10 simple keystrokes. I want to explain what those keystrokes actually meant, because this is the part of the story most people don't expect. Everyone at Marlowe Dynamics believed the routing system belonged to the company. Executives had been bragging about it in quarterly reports for years. Derek had been telling people he managed it. But legally, none of that was true. I had built the entire system on my own equipment, on my own time, and I had quietly registered it 3 years earlier under a private company I created called Vantage Logic Solutions. Marlowe Dynamics had a free license to use my software, a license that was completely revocable at my discretion, because they had never paid me a single dollar for what I built. With those 10 keystrokes, I shut off their access completely. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply taking back what had always legally belonged to me. I closed my laptop, placed it in my box, and walked past Charles and Derek without another word. I took the elevator down, stepped outside into the sunlight, and drove home in complete silence, feeling lighter than I had in years. For 3 days, I turned my phone off entirely. I went for long walks. I slept properly for the first time in months. I didn't check a single email or message. When I finally turned my phone back on, 90 missed calls were waiting for me, along with a company that was falling apart in real time. If this story is pulling you in, do me a small favor and tap that subscribe button right now, because the next part is exactly where everything they thought they understood about me gets turned completely upside down. The messages painted a picture of complete chaos. Trucks stranded with no routing instructions. Warehouses backed up with no way to process incoming shipments. Major clients threatening to cancel contracts worth millions. Charles had called 20 times. Derek had called even more, his voice in the voicemails cracking with panic I had never heard from him before. Later that morning, my family showed up at my apartment uninvited. My aunt, my cousin, and Derek, all standing in my hallway like they were preparing for battle. Derek pushed past me without asking, his suit wrinkled, his tie loose, looking nothing like the confident man who had smirked at me in that boardroom just days earlier. He demanded I give him the passwords immediately. He said thousands of trucks were stuck, that our biggest client was threatening to pull their entire contract, that if I didn't fix it, the whole company could collapse. I told him calmly that I no longer worked there, and that his problems were no longer mine to solve. My aunt stepped in, trying her familiar routine of guilt and gentle pressure, telling me family doesn't act this way, that I needed to help Derek because he was under so much stress. My cousin, 7 months pregnant, started crying dramatically, saying the stress wasn't good for the baby, that I was destroying their future out of jealousy. I stood my ground. I told them plainly that the software had never belonged to Marlowe Dynamics. It belonged to me, legally, through a company I had built years earlier specifically to protect exactly this kind of situation. I explained that I had simply exercised my right to end a free license I never should have given away so easily in the first place. The room went completely silent. My aunt looked at me, like I had spoken a foreign language. Derek's face drained of color as the truth finally settled in. Without my system, his promotion meant absolutely nothing, because he had never actually understood how any of it worked in the first place. He tried threats next, insisting Charles had already contacted the police, that I would face serious legal consequences for what I'd done. I told him calmly that shutting off access to my own private property wasn't a crime, and that he might want to speak with an actual lawyer before making promises he couldn't keep. Eventually, I asked them all to leave. When my father started raising his voice, insisting I hand over my laptop for the sake of the family name, I picked up my phone, showed him I was one button away from calling the police myself, and gave them 30 seconds to walk out of my home. They left, furious, threatening, completely unaware of just how much worse things were about to get for them. The very next morning, I met with my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Reyes, who had helped me quietly register my company years earlier. She confirmed everything I already knew. My intellectual property rights were completely secure. Marlowe Dynamics had absolutely no legal claim to software I built entirely outside of work hours on my own equipment. But Patricia had something else waiting for me, something I hadn't expected at all. While reviewing the server logs I had saved before leaving, she noticed unusual patterns buried deep inside the billing system for our largest client. Small, almost invisible discrepancies, fractions of a cent shaved off thousands of transactions every single day. Individually meaningless. Together, over several months, they added up to more than $800,000 quietly funneled into a hidden account. The digital signature, attached to those transactions, traced directly back to Derek's employee credentials. I sat there staring at the numbers, feeling the full weight of what this actually meant. Derek hadn't just wanted the promotion for the title or the salary increase. He needed the higher security clearance that came with it to finally authorize transferring that money somewhere untraceable. He needed the promotion to finish what he had already started. And once auditors eventually noticed the missing funds, he needed someone to blame. Someone whose system controlled the exact records where the money had disappeared. He needed me. I felt something cold settle deep in my chest. My own family had pressured me to step aside and hand my career to a man who had been planning to let me take the fall for his theft. Patricia looked at me steadily and said something I've never forgotten. She said the biggest mistake people like Derek always make is assuming the quiet person in the room is also the weakest one in the room. The next morning, I received a message from Charles, demanding I appear at an emergency meeting, mandatory, at 8 sharp, along with the company's biggest client, who was flying in personally to address the outage. The message made it clear. Restore the system, sign over my intellectual property completely, or face criminal charges for sabotage. I read every threatening word calmly, then closed my laptop and started preparing, because I already knew exactly how that meeting was going to end, and it wasn't the way they expected. I walked into that boardroom the next morning carrying a single thick folder instead of a laptop. Charles sat near the head of the table, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Beside him sat 3 corporate lawyers, pens ready, clearly expecting to watch me sign away everything I had built. Derek sat across from them in a new suit, looking far too confident for a man sitting on top of a burning company. He gave me that same smug smile from before, assuming I had finally come to surrender. I didn't sit down. I placed my folder directly on the table and told them plainly that I wasn't there to negotiate anything. Charles exploded, accusing me of sabotage, theft, corporate espionage, threatening me with prison, sliding a legal document across the table demanding I sign over my software immediately. I opened my folder instead and handed each person a copy of the federal registration, proving my company owned every line of that code. I watched the lawyers flip through the pages, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to something close to fear. Then I handed them the second set of documents, the billing records, the hidden account, Derek's digital signature attached to every single unauthorized transaction. The room went completely silent. Derek's face turned pale as he realized exactly what I was holding. He tried denying it, his voice cracking, insisting I was the real thief trying to frame him. Charles, desperate for any explanation that didn't implicate his own poor judgment, almost believed him for a moment. That's when the glass doors opened, and our biggest client walked in personally, alongside my attorney, who had already briefed him on everything the night before. He didn't even look at Charles. He walked straight toward Derek, his expression ice cold, and asked him directly why nearly $1 million had quietly disappeared from his company's accounts over the past several months. Derek had no answer. His confident posture collapsed entirely. Within minutes, security arrived, and he was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, past the same employees who had once respected his title, now watching in complete disbelief. Charles was fired that same afternoon for gross negligence. The client terminated their contract on the spot, which meant the company's financial collapse was now guaranteed. My family's reaction, once the news reached them, was exactly what you'd expect. Panic, blame, desperate pleading for help they no longer deserved. My aunt left me dozens of voicemails swinging between apology and anger, sometimes within the same sentence. I listened to a few, then stopped, because I had finally learned the difference between someone who's truly sorry and someone who's simply afraid of consequences. My cousin never spoke to me again. My father called once, asking me to help pay for Derek's legal defense for the sake of family unity. I told him calmly that family isn't a blank check you cash whenever convenient, and I ended the call. If any part of this story feels familiar to you, whether it's family pressure, workplace betrayal, or being underestimated by people who should have believed in you first, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because I promise the ending is worth staying for. In the months that followed, I built something entirely my own. With the settlement from Marlowe Dynamics and a partnership with the client whose funds Derek had stolen, my small private company grew into something real. A proper office, a growing team of engineers, contracts with companies who valued exactly the kind of quiet, careful work I had always been good at. Derek was eventually convicted of fraud and is currently serving time in federal prison. My cousin, left with nothing after Derek drained their savings trying to fund a lifestyle they could never actually afford, moved into a small apartment with her baby, far from the dream house she once bragged about online. My parents lost a significant portion of their savings after co-signing loans built on Derek's falsified income, loans they can no longer repay. I don't check in on any of them. I don't feel joy about their situation, but I don't feel guilt either. I simply feel free, in a way I hadn't felt in almost a decade. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had understood much earlier. Being the reliable one, the quiet one, the person who fixes everything without complaint, was never actually my weakness. My real mistake was allowing people to mistake my patience for permission to use me. The moment I stopped begging to be recognized and simply protected what I had rightfully built, everything changed. Not because I became someone different, but because I finally stopped shrinking myself down to make other people feel comfortable at my expense. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Your hard work, your ideas, and your quiet dedication are never obligations you owe to people who only value you when it's convenient for them. Recognition sometimes comes late, and sometimes it comes exactly when you finally decide you're done waiting for permission to matter. So if you've been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly used by people who claim to care about you, take this as your sign. You don't need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are holding all the leverage and simply waiting for the right moment to use it. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button, Drop a comment telling me the exact moment you realized your own worth, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.